Imagine an empire that held the world in its hands. An empire so vast, its dominion stretched across 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. For 6 centuries it was the center of the world, a superpower whose influence was felt from the sun-scorched deserts of Arabia to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Indian Ocean. Its name echoed in the courts of kings and the prayers of the faithful. This was the Ottoman Empire. For those of us in the modern world, it's sometimes hard to grasp a power so absolute. Think of the United States today, its cultural, economic, and military reach, touching every corner of the globe. Now, imagine that influence, but concentrated in an age of swords and sail, an age where geography was destiny. The Ottomans didn't just rule territory, they commanded the very arteries of global trade. The ancient Silk Road, the spiced routes, the crossroads where East met West. They were the gatekeepers of civilization. Their decisions in the capital could cause markets to crash in London, or fortunes to be made in Venice. Their armies were the most feared on earth. Their fleets controlled the seas, and their culture was a dazzling mosaic of 100 different peoples, all living under the banner of the Sultan. This wasn't just another kingdom. It was the heir to Rome, the successor to Byzantium, a global force that shaped the world we live in today in ways we rarely even realize. Now, let's journey back in time, to the heart of this magnificent empire, to its golden age. The story begins with a city, a jewel coveted by empires for 1,000 years, Constantinople in 1453. The young and brilliant Sultan Mehmed II, known as the Conqueror, achieved the impossible. He breached the legendary walls of the city that had stood defiant for a millennium. Wheat seeds fall, the old world died, and a new one was born. Constantinople became Istanbul, the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, and it would soon become the most glorious city on earth. Imagine walking through its streets. The air is filled with the scent of spices from the east and coffee from Yemen. The call to prayer echoes from the minarets of breathtaking mosques, their domes reaching for the heavens. The Grand Bazaar, a labyrinthine city within a city, teems with merchants from every known land, their stalls overflowing with silks, carpets, precious gems, and handcrafted treasures. You hear a dozen languages spoken in a single street, a testament to the empire's cosmopolitan soul. The city was not just a seat of power, it was a vibrant, living organism, a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and faiths. At the very heart of this magnificent city, perched on a hill overlooking the Bosphorus Strait, lay the Topkapi Palace. This was more than just a royal residence. It was the nerve center of the entire empire, sprawling across vast courtyards and lush gardens. It was a world unto itself. Here, in these opulent halls, the fate of millions was decided. It was a place of immense power, intricate ceremony, and profound secrecy. The daily life of the court was a meticulously choreographed ballet of tradition and protocol. Every gesture, every word, had meaning. The Grand Vizier, the Sultan's chief minister, would preside over the Imperial Council, the Divan, to govern the state's affairs, while an army of officials, scribes, and servants worked tirelessly to keep the machinery of the empire running. And at the center of it all was the Sultan, the Padishah, the shadow of God on earth. He was an absolute monarch, his authority unquestioned. But the great sultans were more than just rulers. They were patrons of the arts, scholars, poets, and military geniuses. Think of Suleiman the Magnificent, whose reign is considered the zenith of the Ottoman Golden Age. He was not only a brilliant military strategist who expanded the empire to its greatest extent, but also a just lawgiver, a poet who wrote under the pen name Mohibi, or lover. He commissioned the architect Mimar Sinan to adorn Istanbul with masterpieces of stone and light, mosques and bridges that still stand today as a testament to his vision. Under his rule, art, science, and literature flourished. The palace workshops produced some of the most exquisite ceramics, calligraphy, and textiles the world has ever seen. Life in the palace was a study in contrasts. Within its gilded chambers, you would find breathtaking beauty and moments of quiet contemplation. Sultans would recline on divans of silk, surrounded by the finest art, listening to music or poetry. Yet, it was also a place of intense pressure and constant intrigue. The succession to the throne was often a matter of life and death, with brothers competing for power in a system that could be both brutal and effective. The famous harem, often mythologized in the West, was in reality a highly structured institution. It was the private quarters of the Sultan and his family, governed by his mother, the Valid Sultan, who often wielded immense political influence from behind the scenes. It was a school, a home, and a political arena, all in one, where women were educated and trained, and from where future empresses and mothers of sultans would emerge. Imagine the dawn breaking over the Bosphorus, its golden light catching the domes and minarets of Istanbul. A stillness settles over the city before the bustle of the day begins. Inside the Topkapi Palace, a new day of governance, art, and ceremony is about to unfold. The empire, in this moment, feels eternal, its foundations as solid as the ancient hills on which its capital stands. It was a time of confidence, of splendor, and of a deep-seated belief in its own divine destiny. From the grandest imperial procession to the quietest prayer in a secluded garden, every aspect of life was infused with a sense of majesty and purpose. This was the world the Ottomans built, a world of unparalleled power and breathtaking beauty, a legacy etched into the very stones of history. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this glimpse into the past relaxing and insightful, please consider subscribing for more stories from history. Come closer and listen. Look upon the gilded domes and towering minarets of Topkapi Palace, the heart of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. In the 16th century, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire was a titan, a beacon of power, wealth, and culture. Its armies were feared, its navies dominated the seas, and its art and architecture dazzled the world. From the outside, it was a fortress of gold and marble, unbreachable, eternal, but power is a deceptive light. While the world watched the empire's brilliant flame, deep within the palace walls, into candlelit corridors, shadows were beginning to lengthen. Unseen by most, hairline cracks were forming in the foundations of this mighty structure. These were not the cracks caused by foreign armies or rival kings. They were subtler, more insidious weaknesses, born from within. Imagine a magnificent old tree. Its trunk is thick, its branches reach for the heavens, but deep inside, a slow rot has begun, hollowing it out from the core. This is the story of that decay. A tale not of grand battles, but of whispered conspiracies, shifting loyalties, and the slow, inexorable erosion of a giant. It's a story that begins not on the battlefield, but in the most lavish and secluded chambers of the palace, where the empire's greatest strengths began to curdle into its most fatal flaws. The very systems that had built the empire were now beginning to tear it apart, piece by invisible piece. The heart of the problem lay in a gilded cage, the caliphs. For centuries, the Ottoman succession was a brutal affair. When a new sultan ascended the throne, he would often have his brothers executed to prevent any challenge to his rule. It was a cruel but effective way to ensure stability. However, by the 17th century, this practice was replaced. Instead of execution, the sultan's brothers and potential heirs were confined to a luxurious prison within the Topkapi Palace, known as the caliphs or the cage. Here they lived in lavish apartments, attended by servants, but cut off from the world, forbidden from having children, and denied any role in governing. What was intended as a humane reform had a devastating consequence. Princes who had once been trained as governors, leading armies and learning the art of statecraft, were now raised in isolation. They spent decades surrounded by servants and intrigue. With no experience of the empire they were one day meant to lead. When their turn finally came to sit on the throne, they were often paranoid, indecisive, or easily manipulated. They were strangers to their own empire, emerging from the shadows of the caliphs, blinking into the harsh light of absolute power, completely unprepared for its burdens. This system began to produce sultans, who were not the hardened warrior statesmen of the past, but fragile puppets, easily controlled by the powerful figures, caduceus, who lurked in the court. And who were these figures? Chief among them was the sultan's own mother, the Valid Sultan. In the Ottoman court, the mother of the reigning sultan held immense power. She was the head of the imperial harem, a world unto itself, a complex society of hundreds of women, eunuchs, and servants, with her son on the throne, particularly an inexperienced one. The Valid Sultan often became the de facto ruler of the empire. She controlled access to the sultan, appointed and dismissed grand viziers, and influenced policy from behind the silken curtains of the harem. This era, known as the Sultanate of Women, saw a succession of brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless women steering the ship of state. While some were capable administrators, their power was personal, not institutional. It bred a culture of intense rivalry and backstabbing. The court became a labyrinth of competing factions, viziers, pashas, and generals, instead of focusing on the needs of the empire, spent their energy plotting against one another, trying to win the favor of the valid sultan or other powerful figures in the harem. Corruption became rampant. High offices were no longer given to the most competent, but sold to the highest bidder. The Grand Vizier, the empire's chief minister, might find his position, and indeed his life, dependent on the whim of a palace eunuch or a favored concubine. The very act of governing became a treacherous game of survival, where loyalty was a currency and betrayal a constant threat. This internal rot seeped into a pillar of Ottoman strength. For centuries, the Janissaries were the elite infantry of the empire, a professional slave army fiercely loyal to the Sultan alone. Recruited as boys from Christian families in the Balkans, they were converted, educated, and trained to be the perfect soldiers. They were forbidden to marry or engage in trade, their entire lives dedicated to the Sultan and the state. They were the tip of the Ottoman spear, the force that had conquered Constantinople and struck fear into the heart of Europe. But by the 17th century, this legendary corps was a shadow of its former self. The strict rules that had ensured their discipline were relaxed. Janissaries were now allowed to marry and have families. Their sons were often enrolled in the corps, turning it from a merit-based slave army into a hereditary, privileged caste. They began to engage in business, becoming shopkeepers and artisans, their focus shifting from military readiness to personal wealth. They were no longer the Sultan's slaves, but a powerful political entity, a state within a state. They used the military might to demand higher pay and concessions. If their demands weren't met, they would mutiny, rioting in the streets of Istanbul, deposing viziers, and even murdering sultans who dared to cross them. The very sword that was meant to defend the empire was now held to its throat. As the political and military foundations weakened, the economic pillars began to crumble. The Ottoman Empire was, at its heart, a military machine fueled by conquest. New territories brought new tax revenues, resources, and trade routes. But as Ottoman expansion ground to a halt in the late 17th century, this primary source of income dried up. The empire now had to sustain its vast bureaucracy and army on a static, and soon shrinking, tax base. At the same time, the world was changing around them. The discovery of the Americas had flooded Europe with vast amounts of silver, causing massive inflation. This price revolution hit the Ottoman economy hard. The silver currency they relied on was devalued, and the cost of everything, from soldiers' pay to bread, skyrocketed. Furthermore, European powers like Portugal, Holland, and England had established new sea routes to Asia, bypassing the traditional Ottoman-controlled land routes like the Silk Road. The lucrative taxes and tariffs from this ancient trade, which had filled the Sultan's coffers for centuries, dwindled to a trickle. The economic center of the world was shifting away from the Mediterranean and towards the Atlantic, leaving the Ottomans economically isolated and struggling to adapt. Imagine the atmosphere inside the palace during this slow decline. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and expensive incense, but also with suspicion. Every rustle of a silken robe, every whispered conversation in a shadowed alcove, carries the weight of potential conspiracy. Sunlight streams through intricate stained glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but it cannot reach the dark corners, where viziers plot and rivals exchange meaningful glances. The opulence is still there. The intricate tiles, the mother-of-pearl inlays, the golden tableware, but it feels like a mask, hiding a growing sickness. The Sultan, perhaps a young man raised in the caves, sits on his throne, weighed down by jewels and tradition. But his eyes are fearful. He is surrounded by people protocolos, but trusts no one. His decisions are not his own. They are the result of 100 different pressures, 100 different whispers in his ear. The silence in the grand halls is not peaceful. It is a tensive, waiting silence, pregnant with the knowledge that a single misstep, a single poorly chosen word, could lead to a fall from grace or a quiet execution. This was the quiet reality that gnawed at the Empire's soul. It was a world of gilded surfaces and rotten cores, where the quiet, creeping tension of the court was a far greater threat than any army massing at the borders. The giant was not being slain. It was being poisoned from within, one drop at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more dives into the hidden corners of history. In the quiet hum of history, a story unfolds, not with the clash of swords, but with a slow, creeping exhaustion. It is the story of an empire, once a titan astride the world, now finding its very soul drained by wars that have no end. Imagine a great tapestry, woven with threads of gold and crimson, depicting glorious victories and boundless ambition. Now, picture that same tapestry, left out in the relentless rain of conflict, its vibrant colors bleeding into a uniform, somber gray. This is the fate of an empire caught in the quagmire of perpetual war. The grand triumphs that once echoed through its halls have faded into the grim reality of attrition. The treasury, once overflowing, now trickles away into the thirsty sands of distant battlefields. The people, who once cheered their legions on with patriotic fervor, now watch with weary eyes as their sons and daughters march off to conflicts they no longer understand. Two lands whose names have become synonymous with loss. This is not a story of a dramatic, sudden collapse, but of a slow, draining sickness that saps the strength from within, leaving behind a hollow shell of former glory. For 2 long minutes, we've contemplated this shadow. Now, let us walk through the fog of these fading battlefields. Let's start in the heartlands of the Old World, in Europe, where the Empire's borders were once etched in stone and steel. Here, the conflicts were born of ancient rivalries and shifting elite. What began as decisive campaigns to secure dominance devolved into a tangled web of sieges, skirmishes, and stalemates. The Empire poured its finest legions into these lands, believing its superior discipline and technology would grant swift victory. But the forests were deep, the winters unforgiving, and the local peoples fiercely resistant. Every fortress taken cost a river of blood, and every mile of territory gained was paid for with the lives of a generation. The generals, once lauded as heroes, became grim accountants of loss, their dispatches home filled not with tales of glory, but with desperate pleas for more men, more supplies, more time. The very landscape seemed to rebel, the muddy fields swallowing men and horses alike, the dense fog concealing ambushes that bled the legions dry, one patrol at a time. The grand strategy of conquest was lost in the brutal, day-to-day struggle for survival. Simultaneously, on the other side of its vast domain, the Empire was bleeding in the sun-scorched deserts of the Middle East. Here, the nature of war was different, but no less draining. It was a war of ghosts and shadows, fought against elusive tribes who knew the terrain as they knew their own hands. The Empire built its mighty forts and patrolled its long, straight roads, but the enemy was like the wind everywhere and nowhere. Convoys were ambushed, isolated garrisons were overrun, and the desert itself became a weapon. Its unforgiving heat and lack of water taking a toll as heavy as any sword. The soldiers, trained for pitched battles on open plains, found themselves fighting an unseen foe in labyrinthine city streets and hidden mountain passes. The local cultures, ancient and proud, resisted the Empire's rule with a quiet, stubborn defiance that could not be broken by force. Every attempt to impose order only sowed more chaos, breeding resentment that would flare into open rebellion at the slightest opportunity. The Empire found itself policing a land it could not understand, fighting a people it could not conquer, its authority a mirage shimmering in the desert heat. The most tangible sign of this decline was the slow, painful contraction of its borders, territories that had been part of the Empire for centuries. Their people integrated and their economies intertwined, began to slip from its grasp. In the north, barbarian tribes, once held at bay by a line of imposing fortifications, grew bolder. They saw the Empire's preoccupation with its other wars, the thinning of its garrisons, and they began to test the defenses. At first, it was small raids, then larger incursions, until entire provinces were under threat. The Empire, its resources stretched thin, was forced into a series of agonizing choices, which territories to defend and which to abandon. Each retreat was a blow to imperial prestige, a signal of weakness that invited further aggression. On the frontiers, imperial banners that had flown for generations were lowered for the last time, replaced by the standards of new, rising powers. These were not just losses of land. They were fractures in the very idea of the empire, proof that its power was no longer absolute, its borders no longer within the military itself, the engine of imperial power. A deep stagnation had set in. The legions, once the most innovative and adaptable fighting force in the world, became prisoners of their own tradition. The endless cycle of low-intensity warfare on multiple fronts stifled creativity. Tactics that had been perfected for a different era were applied robotically to new challenges, with disastrous results. There was no time for reform, no resources for experimentation. The officer corps, once a meritocracy of talent, became rigid and hierarchical, promoting conformity over initiative. The best and brightest were often lost in the endless grind of frontier warfare, while those who excelled at navigating the bureaucracy rose to the top. The quality of the individual soldier also declined. The proud citizen soldiers of old were replaced by long-serving professionals, many recruited from the very peoples the empire was fighting. Their loyalty was often to their pay and their commanders, not to a distant emperor or an abstract ideal. The legions became a hollow force, impressive in their gleaming armor on the parade ground, but brittle and exhausted on the battlefield. But the true cost, the one that cannot be measured in lost territory or depleted treasuries, was the human cost. It was the farmer's son who never returned from a desert patrol, his name a fading memory in a quiet village. It was the young wife who became a widow, left to raise children who would never know their father. It was the veteran who returned home, his body scarred and his mind haunted by the things he had seen and done, finding himself a stranger in his own land. Generations of young men were consumed by the wars, their energy, their talent, their very lives sacrificed to maintain a crumbling edifice. The constant grief and anxiety cast a pall over society. The patriotic songs lost their power. The victory monuments became reminders of loss, and a deep cynicism took root. People began to question the purpose of it all. Why were their children dying in faraway lands for causes they no longer believed in? The social contract between the rulers and the ruled began to fray. The empire, which had once promised peace and prosperity in exchange for loyalty, was now demanding endless sacrifice for endless war. The soul of the empire wasn't lost in any single, epic battle. It was chipped away, piece by piece, with every funeral procession, every orphaned child, every soldier's waking nightmare. As we stand here, amidst the imagined echoes of these fading conflicts, we see the complete picture. An empire has stretched to its breaking point, fighting wars on all fronts. Its armies, once invincible, are now spread thin and exhausted. Its treasury is empty, its people are weary, and its spirit is broken. The fog of war has settled not just over the battlefields, but over the entire empire, obscuring the path forward and chilling the hearts of its citizens. The banners, once bright with the colors of conquest, now hang limp and faded, symbols of a glory that is past. This is the slow, inexorable end. Not a fiery explosion, but a long, twilight descent into silence. The greatest threat to the empire was not the enemy at the gates, but the hollowing out from within. The slow, silent death of its will to fight, its will to live, its will to be. This journey through the twilight of an empire reminds us that the foundations of power are not just military might or economic strength, but also the spirit and well-being of its people. When that spirit is eroded by the relentless strain of conflict, even the greatest of empires can crumble. The lessons are etched into history, written in the fog of forgotten battlefields and the tears of countless generations. Thank you for joining me on this reflective journey. If you found this exploration of history meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories from the past. Your support helps us continue to bring these narratives to light. Until next time.